Well, I have to admit that it's really an honor for me to be able to stand here and introduce actually one of my mentors and colleagues when I was here as a resident way back when. And so Elliot Dashi is the former Dean of Medicine and Biologic Sciences at Brown University. He is an academic physician executive, Harvard educated in healthcare management. He's a member of the National Academy of Medicine, which was formerly the Institute of Medicine. And I actually didn't realize since 1999, I mean, it's a quarter century he's been part of that elite group of individuals. He received his medical degree from Sackler School of Medicine, completed residency training and in OBGYN at Tufts University. Do I say from 74 to 77? I guess I can do that. And pursued fellowship training in subspecialty of reproductive endocrinology and postdoctoral training in reproductive biology. He did that at Johns Hopkins University and at the University of California at San Diego, respectively, from 77 to 91, at which time he came to our illustrious institution here and spent the next 15 years from 1981 to 1996 here at University of Maryland, followed by becoming the chair of OBGYN at the University of Utah from 1996 to 2004, at which point he then left and became the dean at Brown University, and he's been there since there. It's really just an honor. I'll pass this around. He gave us a slight update. These are not all his publications. These are just the last, maybe 10 years worth of things that he has been doing with his time. You will find him with multiple op-eds during in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. So I'm always looking for him to do. He is a tenured professor of medical science at Brown, and he's a member of the Brown Center for Prison Health and Human Rights, which I didn't realize. I mean, I am very much in that. I'd love to hear more about that. And maintains multiple educational responsibilities, inclusive of the co-directorship of the Healthcare in America course, which is a highly subscribed medical student elective, and the co-directorship of the Healthcare Policy Concentration elective for medical students with special interest in healthcare policy. So with that, it is my distinct honor to please introduce our speaker, Elliot Dashi, to speak on trans conception in the same-sex couples. Dr. Dashi, it's an honor.
Thank you. It's good to be home. And I really think of it as home because, yes, I did other things thereafter. But as I was trying to convey to a select group of yours last night at dinner, in what was, I guess, a quasi-formal presentation, I really tried to summarize my recollections and my feelings as they relate to the University of Maryland. And there is no question in my mind that this will always remain a central piece of my professional life, none that I could have predicted, none that I could have foreseen. But whatever chance brought me to interview with Dr. Crenshaw and eventually join the department, spend 15 years here, start a fellowship program, start an NIH-funded research program, and in general, just be part of what I would call a family. This is unlike any department I've been into before, and the term family, I think, really fits the description. So thank you very much for having me, which, as I mentioned last night, I've been trying to do on an annual basis ever since I left, meaning schedule a grand round presentation here once a year. And most of the time that worked out, not every time. COVID, of course, didn't exactly help in that regard. But I hope that we're back on schedule now, post-COVID, and I hope to see you all again perhaps next year. The topic I will be discussing today, by definition, you could view as eccentric and definitely unforeseen. But time changes, time moves on, and there are now inklings. And I wouldn't suggest that there is as yet any human being born as a result of same-sex conception. But we can see the writing on the wall. It happened already in the rodent, and it's just a matter of time when and if it will happen in the human. In other words, the technologies are moving forward. The fundamental technology is known as in vitro gametogenesis, which is to say the creation of egg and sperm in a dish, irrespective of a contribution by either a man or a woman. And in the next presentation, which I believe the residents are scheduled for, I will be discussing that technology. So in some respects, the lecture is upside down, but last year I discussed here in vitro gametogenesis, I believe, over Zoom. And so I thought I would bring out something new for the faculty. And Lord knows that this is a titillating title because it's a titillating topic. And so let me take a stab at it and let us all immerse ourselves in the, at this point, potentiality of same-sex reproduction. I'm starting by displaying this classic painting by Albrecht Dürer, which dates back to 1504, and which illustrates, of course, Adam and Eve, perhaps the millionth depiction of that imaginary scene. But it goes to the heart of what we all know, and that is that sex is essentially a relationship between a man and a woman, XX plus XY, which gives rise to the children we all know and we all have. So what we are discussing today is really a marked departure for humanity. We never ever, I think, could imagine that that might be possible one fine day. And it might. I believe that the young members of the audience may well be around when this becomes a reality. Yours truly may or may not be there when it happens, but I can see the writing on the wall, and I can see the indications evolving in that direction. Now, in delving into the same-sex situation, I needed to educate myself a little bit about what is the status of same-sex relationship in the US, how many same-sex US households exist, what are the fertility realities of same-sex couples today, and what, if anything, can be said about so-called same-sex state infertility mandates, in which you will see Maryland is a leader. That may not be news because Maryland has been a leader in the infertility mandates all along, but they also took the lead in the context of same-sex conception, should it transpire in the future, and right now, obviously with the assistance of donor gametes. So to go back to the number of same-sex US households, you have to go to the United States Census Bureau to secure that information. As then you can see, the number of same-sex households from 2008 to the present have increased to reach about 1.2 million Americans. I have to say I was somewhat surprised. I thought there was a relatively low number, considering that we are a nation of 300 million plus. But we will have to take for now the word of the United States Census Bureau, which is not beyond criticism and or errors, but that's the sole and only reliable source out there you can find that may give you that information. As you can see, some of those couples are married and some of them are unmarried partners. So if you are a gynecologist or reproductive endocrinologist today, and you see a same-sex couple who is seeking to have children other than by way of pure adoption, we know what the protocol is. So for a same-sex female couple seeking conception, essentially what we need is the missing link. It's the sperm donor. And when it comes to same-sex male couples who are seeking conception, it's more or less the same. We need an egg donor. And in both cases, we really need a surrogate to carry the pregnancy. Now, in the case of two women, one of those women could serve as the carrier. But when you talk about same-sex male couple, they will need a female surrogate to carry the resultant pregnancy. Now, I mentioned the mandates, which at their core are designed to decrease the financial pressure on couples who are seeking infertility therapy. The mandates for the treatment of heterosexual couples have been around for a long time and are by no means present in every state of the Union. But I'm not sure I'm showing it here today, but if my memory serves me right, about 19 states are now home to an infertility mandate that is applicable to heterosexual couples. California was the last state to do so, meaning they just announced, Governor Newsom just announced a state mandate for infertility in California, both for heterosexual couples and for same-sex couples. But Maryland, as I mentioned to you, was in the lead from the moment go. In 1985, Maryland officially signed into law the first state infertility mandate in the nation. We wrote a paper about it many years later. My co-author was Bill Schlaf, who sadly left us last year, unfortunately. And at the time, as you can see in the photograph and the next one, the governor who signed the law was Governor Harry Rowe Hughes, who was governor from 1979 to 1987. I could be wrong, but I think we lost Governor Hughes as well sometime in the last several years. Now, even though we had a heterosexual infertility mandate, the question was, did the 1985 mandate apply to same-sex couples? And the answer is no. It took 30 more years, all the way to 2015, for Maryland anyway, catch up on the same-sex mandate. We wrote a paper about that in 2015, at which point it wasn't clear that it was going to happen, but we had a hunch. And the title of the paper was A Same-Sex Infertility Health Insurance Mandate in Maryland, ? And as history tells us, Governor Larry Hogan Jr. was the governor at that time, a Republican and a conservative Republican. And it seemed unlikely that he was going to sign this bill into law. Turns out the Maryland Constitution has an out. There is this particular section of the Maryland Constitution which under certain circumstances allows the legislature to bypass, if you will, the governor and to enact a law absent a signature of the governor. And that's exactly what happened here. This is the language of the bill, or part of it, from Legiscan, and I'm going to read this. Prohibiting insurers, nonprofit health service plans, and health maintenance organizations from requiring specified conditions of coverage for specified infertility benefits for a patient who is married to an individual of the same sex. So in 2015, Maryland established a mandate that was now applicable to same-sex couples. Other states, in time, followed as well. New Jersey joined in 2017, New York in 2020, Illinois in 2022, Colorado in 23, Maine in 2024, and as I just mentioned, California, courtesy of Governor Newsom, added an infertility mandate for same-sex couples. So it's still a limited list, really just 6 states, but there's every reason to believe, let's say, that in time, this may in fact be expanded. So now we have to look back at the future and discuss the possibility. And I'm emphasizing possibility because it has yet to happen in the human, of assisted same-sex conception. In which context, 2 technologies are relevant. One, which I will discuss in the next lecture, is known as in vitro gametogenesis, which, in a word, is the creation of eggs and sperm in a dish from scratch. By that I mean from pluripotent stem cells, to be precise, meaning guiding the stem cells towards a gametogenic fate. So in vitro gametogenesis is a breakthrough that deserves all of our collective attention and will change IVF as we know it, because the prolonged gonadotropin stimulation intended for the maturation of eggs and the surgical procedure of the retrieval thereof, all of that may in time disappear. So if we can create eggs in a dish and the husband contributes the sperm, then we're all set to proceed with IVF, but a much shorter IVF. I'm not going to venture more affordable IVF because the US of A has been a champion at somehow jacking prices up no matter what. And so, but it will be a market improvement for women who will not need to spend the time, the pain, and the rest of it to conceive. The second technology, which I personally don't think will eventually be applicable to people, but is working, involves the modification of some genes that are involved in imprinting. That has been accomplished in the rodent. As I look at it, I feel that I would be reluctant to edit those genes in human beings until we really know what that means and what it does. These genes are not there just for imprinting, and it's not really clear what their overall function is, and there are quite a few of them that have to be deleted. And so I mention this because it's real and it's happening in rodents, but I'm not sure that this will ever fly in the context of people. So let's say a few words about IVG. I'll say more in the next hour. This technology has been receiving increasing attention. Science magazine saw fit to publish a spread in 2021 titled Mammalian in Vitro Gametogenesis. The two authors are really the two individuals who began this process and are still working at it. They're both Japanese. I met them both personally and spent a day with them in around 2013 when I was beginning to sense that something's happening in Kyoto University while I was in Japan for another reason. And since that time, I've been in close touch with both of them. Professor Hayashi has since moved on to establish his own lab in a different university. And him I met in New York about 3 or 4 weeks ago when we shared a postgraduate course we both participated in. It is somewhat striking and surprising that there really is no American presence here. You'd be hard-pressed to find an American scientist working on in vitro gametogenesis. So one would have to say that this is a purely Japanese invention, if you will, that nobody here has yet picked up. I say so in part because I organized a 2.5-day workshop of the National Academy of Medicine in Washington, D.C. a year ago. And while many Americans presented, none of them really spoke to the basic laboratory principles that give rise to these uniquely devised gametes. So to this day, these two names are really the ones you want to think about when in vitro gametogenesis comes up. The New England Journal of Medicine, not to be outdone, did commission a paper from Mary Herbert and Azim Surani, who are well known in the field of gamete physiology, but really did nothing in vitro gametogenesis. They just wrote a review for the New England Journal of Medicine at the request of the editor. And this is the workshop I alluded to, which took place in 2023 in Washington, D.C. It was titled In Vitro-Derived Gametes as a Reproductive Technology. And so, as we speak today, in vitro gametogenesis is no longer an uncertainty. We have yet to make it fully operational in humans. That is true. But it's been made to work in the rodent. And it's just a question of time, in my mind, before we see it happen in people. So what is in vitro gametogenesis briefly, because we will dedicate a separate lecture to that. You can take a skin cell, for that matter, any somatic cell, convert it to an induced pluripotent stem cell, a technology which, by the way, was devised in Kyoto University and was rewarded by the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 2012. These are cells that can go anywhere. They are pluripotential. But you have to know what to treat them with so that they go where you want them to go. But they can become anything, including gametes. And so that's how in vitro gametogenesis operates at its core. Now, it's easier said than done. To accomplish this, we need to know the cues that need to be applied, the sequence by which they are applied, the timing thereof, and the context of the niche. And by that I mean, you all know that gametes are surrounded by somatic cells. In the ovary, it's the granulosa cells and the theca cell. In the testes, it's the Sertoli cell. And they play a role, a very important role, due to complicated crosstalk that we're still trying to figure out in the maturation of gametes. So among the things you need to know when you're talking in vitro gametogenesis is what, if anything, do the granulosa, theca, or Sertoli cells contribute to the process? The niche, as I just expounded on, are the somatic cells encasing the germ cell element. In the female, we're talking granulosa theca, and in the male, we're talking Sertoli cells. So now I'll switch to the murine species, because what is possible in the rodent is, of course, not immediately or inevitably possible in the human. And we'll start with the female germline and with a paper published by Katsuhiko Hayashi in Nature in 2016, the title of which says it all: Reconstitution in vitro of the entire cycle of the mouse female germline. Briefly, he started with stem cells, combined them with somatic cells, created primary oocytes, converted those to M2 oocytes, fertilized those, gave rise to embryos, blastocysts, and eventually pups. So in the rodent, the entire cycle has now been accomplished in the context of the female. The same eventually transpired in the context of the male rodent, this time by Professor Mitinori Saito, whose paper was titled In Vitro Reconstitution of the Whole Male Germ Cell Development from Mouse Pluripotent Stem Cells. Without going into any details, let me just say that what we just saw for the female has now been accomplished for the male. But that's all in the rodent. And the question is, what, if anything, can we say about the human? There have been efforts to take in vitro gametogenesis to its logical conclusion in the female by Professor Mitinori Saito. But as you will see, he was unable to get to the promised land, meaning to the end of the line. He started with human primordial germ cell-like cell induction, combined them with somatic cells, and then went through in vitro gametogenesis all the way to the oogonial stage. But he could not produce M2 oocytes. Now, in my mind, it's just a matter of time. I say so because everything I know about Professor Saito tells me he'll figure it out. He's working with monkeys. He's working with other animal models. I wouldn't be surprised if one day we woke up to the news on the pages of Science that this sequence has been completed. On the male side, we are equally limited. In this case, the protagonist is Dr. Kotaro Sasaki, who is faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. And he attempted reconstitution of prospermatogonial specification in vitro from human-induced pluripotent stem cells, but again, did not get to the last necessary point. And so he continues to work on this issue. So one way to put it is that human IVG still has a ways to go. We're not there yet. We definitely cannot apply it. And even if we knew how to do it, we would still need to get the FDA to sign off on this technology as approvable. And that will require clinical trials. It will require a formal approval process. And that in itself would take years before it happens. But I am being premature because, as I said, we're not quite ready to embark on any of those trials. But IVG also brought forth the notion of bipaternal parenthood. And interestingly, the actors in question are the same ones that are active in the IVG field. Now, you could legitimately ask, is this an attainable goal? It definitely wasn't intended, if you will, by nature. But it seems that we are on a road that sooner or later will change the map in that respect, and I'll try to illustrate to you how. And as is true in any form of science, the rodent model led the way here. We have no indications in a human at this point of the possibility of same-sex reproduction. I say here, human application may follow, but we have to concede that today it remains futuristic. But back to the rodent and to a Nature paper published by Katsuhiko Hayashi in 2023, titled Generation of Functional Oocytes from Male Mice in Vitro. And that's what you really need if you're going to move to same-sex conception. If one member of the same-sex male couple is able to, through in vitro technology, contribute oocytes, and the other member of the couple able to naturally produce sperm, you have a union. You still need a surrogate, female surrogate, to carry the pregnancy. But in theory, the resultant child will have the genetic imprints of both men who are the genetic parents of a child born through this new technology.
Can I interrupt you?
By all means.
What about lionization in those gametes? Did they check for lionization?
They did not, but the point's well taken.
Yeah.
In a commentary, I would say, more or less, published in Nature, same issue, the title was Eggs from Male Stem Cells Using Error-Prone Culture, which is one way of getting there. Also, and I'll show you later, there was reference made to mice born to two dads, if you will. So briefly and schematically, what Professor Hayashi did, he obtained somatic cells from sexually mature male mice, specifically from the skin. And he converted those to XY-induced pluripotent stem cells. Nothing new so far. Then he cultured those XY-induced pluripotent stem cells. And in time, both spontaneously and with the assistance of a drug called reversin, some cultured XY-induced pluripotent stem cells lost the Y chromosome in culture and spontaneously converted to XX-induced pluripotent stem cells in culture. So now you have the substance with which to work. Take it to a mature M2 oocyte, combine it with a sperm, and off we go with same-sex reproduction. Of course, all in this case, so far in the rodent. At the same time, isolated XX induced pluripotent stem cells were converted to oocytes via IVG. Nothing new there. And the resultant oocytes were fertilized, and embryos were transferred to surrogate female mice to yield what we can legitimately now say bipaternal offspring. And I think this additional commentary in Nature captures some of what we just said. And the piece is titled "The Mice with Two Dads." I mean, talk about an unimaginable development and a historic modification of what all of us were accustomed to expect since Adam and Eve, whenever that was.
Those mice were grown in surrogate mice? When you had the two dads?
Yes,
They developed.
yes, yes. So, like it or not, scientists have been pushing forward in this arena as an offshoot of in vitro gametogenesis. And while I'm not aware of any efforts to do the same in the human, everything I know from my life in science tells me that it's just a question of time before some of this will happen. Now, I mentioned to you that there is another technology to achieve same-sex parenting. It involves the modification of genomic imprinting. I also said at the outset that while this is an interesting scientific endeavor, I would not feel comfortable at this time anyway to see it applied specifically to women. I will go through it, but at the outset, I'm immediately stating my bias that maybe it's doable, but I don't think this is clinically practical or applicable to a human. The first paper in this series saw press in 2007 in Nature Biotechnology and was titled "High Frequency Generation of Viable Mice from Engineered Bimaternal Embryos." This same group continued to work and in 2016 published on the pages of Cell Research a paper titled "Birth of Fertile Bimaternal Offspring Following Intracytoplasmic Injection of Parthenogenetic Haploid Embryonic Cell." And they proceeded to report on the pages of Cell Research the paper titled "Birth of Fertile Bimaternal Offspring Following Intracytoplasmic Injection of Parthenogenetic Haploid Embryonic Stem Cell." And later on, they proceeded to report on the generation of bimaternal and bipaternal mice from hypomethylated haploid embryonic stem cells with imprinting region deletion. And most recently, and this barely saw press, I added this slide at the last minute, these same investigators published in Cell Stem Cell a paper titled "Adult Bipaternal Offspring Generated Through Direct Modification of Imprinted Genes in Mammals." Because I think we all agree that what the FDA should do, given a regulatory mandate, is only approve drugs or technologies that are safe and effective. And that's what the FDA does for a living. Don't ask me to go into the FDA as it stands today after the last election, but until now anyway, the matter was safe and effective, and everything else was put aside. And so I will say to you, even though all of us were born and likely raised in an era where the expectation was that we will one fine day meet an individual of the opposite sex, and that together with that individual, we may become parents of children. That remains true doubtlessly for the lion's share of us and the lion's share of our children. But the point is that somewhere down the line, individuals who don't subscribe to this paradigm and who are homosexual, they could, in due course, be parents of biologically owned children. And as I say, to me, this remains mind-blowing because it runs counter to everything I was brought up on, of course. My son is also too old to, at this point, change his views, but his children and beyond, they may grow up with a very different conception of what parenthood means. To us, it always meant a father and a mother. To them, it could one fine day mean two fathers or two mothers. I'm very friendly with a large number of same-sex couples who serve as parents to the children, albeit not biologic parents. These are adopted children that they grow. So it's not as if same-sex couple are somehow inapt at serving as parents. So, but the biologic angle was missing. And that may well be something that will happen in the lifetime of the young residents who have joined us today. So with that, I would say, stay tuned and keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you.